Imagine for a moment that you've just watched the results of the US election roll in. The news anchors are still talking, the markets are twitching, and somewhere between relief and disbelief, you open a browser tab and type, almost absent-mindedly, how to move to Canada. You're not alone. In early 2025, right after that political storm settled, a quiet spike appeared online. It wasn't a protest or a movement, no one held a press conference, but the data spoke volumes. Google searches for "immigrate to Canada" from the US jumped more than 200% overnight. It was a digital murmur that said, maybe, just maybe, people were planning something not as loud as a march but more permanent than a tweet. People weren't packing pitchforks. They were packing boxes. From outside the US, that moment was fascinating to watch. While the news fed on drama, the economy wobbled, and social media lit up with fear of recession or market crashes. A parallel conversation was happening in living rooms and on laptop screens. People who once measured success by job title or square footage started measuring it by peace of mind. They weren't fleeing chaos so much as they were trying to find a softer rhythm to live by. This wasn't about a grand ideological statement. It was about where you could breathe a little easier, raise a family without watching health bills climb higher than your rent, and live in a country whose policies seem designed for stability rather than spectacle. So let's talk about what some have begun calling the silent American exodus, a drift, not a flood. It's the story of Americans, many of them educated and employed, who are quietly looking north. There's no caravan, no chaos at the border. It's more like a series of resignation letters, home listings, and one-way flights to Vancouver, Montreal, or Halifax. And while there's plenty of misinformation swirling online, the truth is far subtler, and maybe even more revealing. After all, migration between two wealthy nations rarely makes headlines unless there's a crisis. But this one tells us something about dignity, policy, and what happens when everyday life starts to feel like a treadmill you can't step off. Canada, in this story, isn't offering a utopia. It's offering structure. It's saying, here are the rules, here's the path, you can plan this. And that, for many Americans right now, feels like a kind of mercy. Let's ground this with some real numbers. Canada's immigration, refugees, and citizenship plan for 2025 projects roughly 395,000 new permanent residents, then drops to 380,000 in 2026 and 365,000 in 2027. That's a big pipeline, but not all of it is American by any stretch. In fact, Statistics Canada data show that US citizens moving north actually declined by about 20% during the early years of the 46th American administration compared to the previous one. Interestingly, the flow seems to rise when certain leaders return to power, then calm down again, as though politics itself flips a migration switch. What that suggests is that cross-border migration isn't constant, it's reactive. People's choices move with political mood and economic weather. Still, three pieces of evidence together point toward a quiet, long-term shift. First, the surge in search signals. After the 2024 election, interest in how to immigrate to Canada shot up sharply, especially from large US metro areas like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. Searches don't prove action, but they do reveal sentiment. Thinking about moving is often the first step in reimagining your life. Second, the asylum figures, while the number is small. Around 245 Americans filed refugee claims in Canada in the first half of 2025, it's symbolically huge. When citizens of one of the wealthiest nations begin applying for refugee status, even in tiny numbers, it tells you something about trust and perception. And third, the design of Canada's immigration plan itself. Nearly half of the 2025 intake will be people already studying or working there. By 2027, that could reach 62%. This means migration is increasingly structured, planned, and professional. Still, this isn't a flood. It's not a mass escape. It's a subtle reordering. And to understand it, we need to ask what's pushing people out of the US. And what's pulling them toward Canada. Start with the push factors. The first is housing. For years, housing affordability in major US cities has hovered on the edge of absurd. In March 2025, the median new home price was about $430,000. That's actually down around 7.5% from the year before, but it's misleading because incomes have barely moved. For a couple in their 30s earning decent salaries, the dream of buying in Boston, San Francisco, or Austin can feel more like a financial riddle than a realistic goal. Even analysts at J.P. Morgan, predicting modest 3% growth for the year, admit that the affordability gap keeps widening. People aren't just frustrated, they are fatigued. Then there's healthcare, the old American ghost that refuses to leave. Surveys by the Kaiser Family Foundation show nearly half of adults say healthcare is hard to afford, and roughly 1 in 4 say they've had trouble paying medical bills within the last 12 months. About 11% admit they've skipped treatment or medicine entirely because of cost. And here's the kicker, many of these people are insured. That means even doing everything right, working, earning, paying premiums, doesn't guarantee peace of mind. The stress becomes ambient, the kind that seeps into daily life until it shapes every decision. Add to that slower job growth. The forecasts for 2025 suggest US GDP growth around 1.7%, dipping further in 2026. Job creation has softened too, with average monthly additions falling from 168,000 in 2024 to just 74,000 in 2025. It's not a collapse, but it's a flattening. If you're in the middle, not rich, not poor, just trying to keep up, you feel it most. You're not falling off the map, but you're not climbing either. That limbo feeds the sense that maybe somewhere else offers a clearer trajectory. And under all of that is fatigue, deep, invisible fatigue. The Federal Reserve's 2023 report found 31% of Americans felt worse off than the year before. It's not that the system has broken overnight. It's that it's eroding in slow motion. The paycheck still comes in, but the bills grow faster. The benefits shrink, the sense of control slips. It's not a disaster, it's attrition. And that's harder to headline but easier to live, or rather, harder to keep living with. Now layer on the social dimension. Public discourse has become sharper, angrier. Institutions feel less reliable, and many people describe daily life as more adversarial than cooperative. Some of it is media echo chambers, but some is real disillusionment. When your sense of belonging starts to crack, geography begins to feel negotiable. People don't always leave a country because of fear. Sometimes they leave because they are tired of fighting within it. That's the push. So what about the pull? Canada offers, at least in perception, a version of life that's just a bit more balanced. Not easier, exactly, but designed for dignity. The healthcare system isn't free in the magical sense, but it is universal. The parental leave structure is generous by North American standards, 15 weeks of maternity benefits plus up to 35 weeks of shared parental leave, or 61 weeks if you stretch it out. Parents receive about 55% of their average earnings up to a cap. Compare that to the US, where federal paid leave is still largely non-existent, and many rely on unpaid time off if they qualify at all. For families thinking about their first child, that difference is seismic. And then there's predictability. Canada's ExpressEntry immigration system is points-based. You can literally calculate your odds: education, language, work experience, age. The government publishes draws. If you score high enough, you might get an invitation to apply. It's not arbitrary. And for many Americans used to systems that feel arbitrary, that transparency is magnetic. In 2025 alone, around 45,000 invitations had already been issued by mid-year. Behind each one is someone who sat at a computer, entered their credentials, and thought, maybe this could work. Philosophically, too, Canada projects a quieter promise. It doesn't shout greatness. It offers normalcy. Universal healthcare, labor protections, social safety nets, and public institutions that generally function without drama, all of it feels, to outsiders, like a reminder that government can still be boring in the best way. There's even a running joke: if Walter White from Breaking Bad were Canadian, the show would have ended in the pilot episode, because universal healthcare would have handled his diagnosis. It's a dark joke, but it captures the contrast perfectly. Of course, no one's expecting paradise. Canada's housing markets in Toronto and Vancouver are famously overheated. Public healthcare is equitable but slow. The weather can be punishing. Cultural differences, though subtle, can surprise you. But for many Americans contemplating the move, it's not about perfect. It's about bearable. It's about having a social contract that doesn't make every life event feel like a negotiation. When you look at the composition of migrants, that becomes even clearer. Canada's current targets favour those already integrated: students, skilled workers, people who've proven they can contribute. By 2027, roughly 2/3 of new permanent residents will come through economic class programs. That's not a humanitarian flood, it's a carefully structured intake. It's for planners, not panickers. Yet even small migrations carry big meaning. For the US, every family that leaves represents not just a loss of talent, but a crack in civic faith. When competent, stable citizens quietly opt out, they take more than skills with them. They take their belief that reform is possible. Over time, those departures accumulate into something harder to quantify: cynicism. If enough people start believing the system can't be fixed from within, that belief becomes self-fulfilling. For Canada, meanwhile, it's both opportunity and strain. New arrivals strengthen the workforce, fill gaps in healthcare, tech, and education, and bring cultural vibrancy. But they also add pressure to already tight housing and healthcare systems. When thousands of skilled workers settle in Vancouver or Toronto, demand outpaces infrastructure. Policymakers know it, and the balancing act is constant: growth versus capacity. If you've ever moved countries yourself, you know the emotional calculus behind it. It's not just about jobs or politics, it's about rhythm. It's about what kind of exhaustion you're willing to live with. For Americans weighing the leap, Canada represents a different kind of exhaustion: slower, perhaps kinder, bureaucratic rather than existential. And that's strangely attractive. If you've made it this far, thank you. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, not just about migration, but about what we all expect from our countries. If you're new here, this channel explores how policy, migration, and global systems shape everyday decisions, the quiet choices that end up changing nations. If that resonates with you, make sure to hit subscribe, give this video a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seriously thought about leaving the US? What would push you to make that decision? Or, if you're Canadian watching this, how do you feel about the growing interest from your neighbours to the south? Drop your thoughts in the comments.